Hello and welcome back, USD and our viewers on Facebook Live. This is Bix and K, your favorite sports talk radio show, and we're going to be with you for the next hour, as usual, from 2:30 in the afternoon until 4 o'clock. Super excited to be back with you guys again this week. We got a whole lot to talk about, Kay. It's going to be a good one.
I'm really excited for this week. So much happened in the last 24 to 48 hours, and there's a lot to talk about. We're going to be on from 2:30 to about 3:50, so we'll have a good chunk of change to work with over here.
Yeah, and just a reminder, you can check us out on uofsdradio.com or on our personal Facebook Live feeds, either through my feed right over here or through Kay's feed up at the top on the other side of the studio.
That's right. I'm looking forward to it. So let's get right into it, Bix. What do you want to start with in this glorious week 2 of our show?
I mean, we got a whole lot to talk about
Right.
this week, like you mentioned, but we got to start with the World Series.
We have to. I mean, it's the longest combined drought in World Series history, in MLB's history. We got the Chicago Cubs and the surprise wild card, the Cleveland Indians.
Yep, these are two teams that have a combined 174-year drought between World Series berths. So you better believe that they're both going to be itching to get that title under their belt.
That's right. The World Series kicks off tomorrow, Tuesday, October 25th. I'm really looking forward to this one. I think if you've watched our show before, if you've watched last semester, whatever, you know that Bix is more of the MLB guy. I think that's fair to say, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I am genuinely interested. I plan on watching every game of this series, every inning, and I really hope it's going to be one of those classics that we talk about forever.
Yeah, it's going to be a great one, and with that, I kind of want to start breaking down the chances of both of these teams. Right now, the Cubs are the favorites in Vegas. That being said, I did place a couple of bets on the Cleveland Indians today. I think they're going to come out on top in 6 games. Kay, what are your predictions?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Cubs are favorite. They're almost 1-2 favorites. So if you would have bet $1, you'd only get like 50 cents back. So that's pretty heavy in the world of money line baseball. But that, Vegas bets aside and all that, that really just shows what the public thinks who's going to win. That's really important. I think a lot of people want to bet on the Cubs because it's the Cubs. Like, it's just too magical a situation not to let go of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, these guys haven't made the World Series since 1945. Just a couple of funny things for you. Here are some of the things that were invented from the last time that the Cubs made the World Series until today. The NBA wasn't a thing.
Neither was the NFL.
Neither was the NFL. Sliced bread didn't exist. Microwaves didn't exist. I mean, you name it.
The states of Alaska and Hawaii were not states.
Oh yeah, we had 48 states the last time the Cubs made the World Series. So this is truly historic. I mean, Chicago was going crazy when the Cubs finally clinched against the Dodgers. Speaking of which, that was a little bit of a surprising game. Kershaw kind of fell through for the Dodgers.
And that's just another reason why I believe it was kind of meant to be for these Cubs to make the World Series, and I picked to win it. Honestly, if you were a straight-up analyst of the MLB looking at the last 2 games in this NLCS matchup, you would pick the Dodgers. I would pick the Dodgers. It just seemed like they had the advantage on pitching, and they had the advantage on batting as well. But here we are, the Cubs and the Indians. Now let's pivot a little bit from Chicago to Cleveland. Believeland, is it well and alive? I mean, this season's been Cleveland's year, not in terms of football, but in pretty much everything else.
Yeah, it's great to be a sports fan in Cleveland right now. Like you said, maybe minus the Browns, who are struggling a little bit. We'll get into that as we touch on the NFL a little bit later in our show. But yeah, between the Cavs and the Indians, man, Cleveland's having a good time right now.
That's right. It's the first time they've advanced since 1997. So obviously there is a drought there for them as well, just around 20 years. But do they have the depth and the pitching relief to go for it and win this World Series.
Oh, they absolutely do. And you go back and look at some of the teams that the Indians had in the 90s, and yeah, maybe those teams were flashier and came off better and seemed like they were stronger teams, but really what's gotten the Indians to this point in their season is their depth. They have so many good players out there right now. You could throw anyone anywhere, and when you have the pitching staff to back that up, they're a little banged up as it comes to starting pitchers, but when you look at a bullpen that can go 8 1/3 and do as well as the Indians have done, it just seems like they're unstoppable.
It does. And, this next week, just looking at all of sports is going to be probably the biggest week in sports of the year. It usually is when the World Series is going on, the NFL is in full swing, MLB, the NBA starts, the NHL is in full swing. Competing with all these other sports, do you think the World Series gets the ratings it deserves to get? Do you think so many people, even casual sports fans, are going to tune in because it's like the Cubs and the Indians?
Oh, it's going to get great ratings this year, regardless. Indians playing two teams that aren't usually in it, and generally across the country, the Cubs are or have been referred to as lovable losers, but now that they're actually playing well and getting a shot at a title, you better believe that people will be tuning in. This is going to be probably one of the most watched World Series, I would argue, in recent memory.
I'd have to agree with you there. To be honest, like I'd mentioned, I'm a casual baseball fan, hardcore sports fan. I couldn't name the last 3 matchups in the World Series, but the Cubs and the Indians have really captured my attention. Honestly, though, even if it was the Cubs and the Blue Jays, it would have been just as interesting. But I think the fact that it's Believe Land, it's 2016, that also holds a great bit of attention for me.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to delve into the keys a little bit for each team. How do you think the Cubs win this series?
Aside from the intangibles, they have the important thing is that they've been healthy and they have the right amount of the right balance of pitching and pitching relief. So when you look at the Cubs, what's the first name that comes to your mind?
It's got to be Chris Bryant for
Right.
me, USD alum. Little
USD
shout out to
alum.
him. Good luck. Sorry I'm not picking the Cubs to win, but wish you all the best if you're listening out there somewhere.
Right. So, yeah, I think of Chris Bryant as well, but they have so many key players. For example, I believe the MVP of the NLCS was won by 2 Cubs players, if I'm not wrong.
I believe so. I believe it was Javi Baez,
Yes.
and I'm blanking on the other winner, maybe John Lester.
Yeah, I am too. It's okay, we're not professionals. But that's kind of my point. They have so many key players there, and they have just the right amount of balance between all levels of the game, and I think that's what wins them, the World Series. And they have Bill Murray on their side. That's
Always
big
great
reason.
to have Bill Murray. You
That's
see him
right.
crash the White House press conference the other day?
That's right.
He
was in
crashed the
tears.
president's briefing.
He was in
Yeah.
tears the other night when they clinched.
That was great. But no, the Cubs do absolutely have a great shot at winning the World Series. I think when you have an offense like that, especially when you get guys like Addison Russell going and Anthony Rizzo that have been uncharacteristically quiet during the postseason, they have a great chance. And also something that's interesting, saw a couple reports this week, Kyle Schwarber, a guy that we really haven't heard his name since the beginning of the season.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys remember, he got hurt and was out basically all season. Reports of him maybe making an appearance in the World Series. What do you think about that?
Honestly, just stepping back, I think it's the wrong move. I think that they've, I've been stressing balance for the last 2 minutes, but it's a big key to why the Cubs have made it this far. Of course, Kyle Schwarber is a big name to come back because he was lost in week 2, week 3 of the season.
Yeah, really early.
So the fact that it was like ages ago in terms of this season is a big reason why I don't want him back in the World Series because the pressure's high, and it would have been a different story if he would have come back at the beginning of the playoffs to have time to acclimate. People knew that the Cubs were going to make it pretty much this far, but to have him right at the beginning of the World Series where they have to face their toughest matchup in 100 and something years, and especially this season, I don't think it's the right move. I don't know if Kyle Schwarber would agree, though. Obviously, he wants to get
I'm
his
sure
time
he'd
in.
love to be back.
Right, but he would love the ring a little bit more, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm kind of torn on this issue because he's such a great hitter, and maybe in like a pinch hit capacity, you could bring him back, and he would be a great asset to have. But also, like you mentioned, you don't want to mess with the team chemistry. These guys have been playing so well together all year round, and you don't want to throw anything in there that might mix things up. Okay, I know that I'm a very superstitious guy, especially when it comes to baseball. So, as much as I love Kyle Schwarber,
there it is.
I might lay off this one, despite the fact that he is such a talented player.
Right. Okay, so before we move on, you brought this up in our pre-show coverage. Jose Fernandez, looking back, he said that these were the two toughest lineups he had ever faced. A little bit, of an eerie feeling, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was a crazy report. For those of you that saw it, it came out this week that in a conversation with D. Gordon, Jose Fernandez did, like you say, mention that the Indians and the Cubs were the toughest lineups he had to face in baseball. So, yeah, just, funny how things kind of work out. It's interesting. But one thing I really wanted to mention as we're finishing up our coverage of the World Series here is, Kay, I know you're big into checking out how the media covers such big events like this, especially when it comes to playoffs in any sport and their title games. I just wanted to get your thoughts quickly on how baseball has handled the coverage of the playoffs, because they've kind of split things between Fox Sports 1 and MLB.TV if you get coverage on there. And to me, I mean, especially as such a big baseball fan and a college student who can't always pay for some of these different areas to watch the game,
right,
that gets kind of difficult. I know the World Series will air on Fox, on their official station. You can also get it on MLB.TV if you are a subscriber. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've always been really critical of this, Bix, because, you said it right there. If you want to get the millennials involved, if you want, like you and me, if you want to get the college students, people younger, a little older as well, you can't be trying to make us flip through these channels because, one, most likely a lot of us don't even have a cable subscription anymore, and two, I've kind of been critical of FS1. They've gotten a lot better now. I do have Time Warner Cable, so it's a little easier for me to find these channels. But
for fact, Time Warner Cable, who is reportedly being acquired by AT&T to the tune of $80 billion.
Oh, man, you got to catch up with that. That deal's already done. $85 billion signed and done.
That's unreal.
Unreal. Let me get a little bit of that money. What I'm saying is, I've had Dish back home, back in Tennessee, and I couldn't even find FS1 to save my life. Apparently you have to pay extra for it, and don't even get me started on MLB.TV. I don't think it's the right move. I see what they're trying to do there, but, just get those TV rights and make it a little bit more accessible. That's why I like what the NBA has done. They're on big channels, TBS, the Turner Broadcasting Network, CBS and ESPN. So I am critical of that. Like I said, like you said, there will be on Fox, luckily for the World Series, but I don't know. Maybe going forward, the new commissioner can address that so we can get more fans back.
Yeah, so final word from us on the World Series. Okay, we got Kluber going against Leicester, Game 1. Who you got leading off the series? And give me your predictions for the series as a whole.
Where are they playing the first game?
They are playing the first game in Cleveland as the AL won the All-Star game this year.
All right, interesting. See, I like that rule, actually. It's really interesting.
I do, too. It gets a lot of criticism, but I'm a fan. It
right.
gives meaning to a game that would otherwise have no meaning. And we've seen with things like the NFL Pro Bowl that's not always a good thing if there's
right.
no meaning to an All-Star game.
But going back, I would. I'm going to take Cleveland in the first game, and then I'll have Chicago evening out before going back to Wrigley and getting it done in Wrigley. So I got them winning in, 5? I got them winning in 5.
Wow.
Chicago Cubs.
Dropping Game 1 and then winning the next 4.
That's right.
All right, Chicago in 5. I've got Cleveland in 6. I think it's going to be a hard-fought series, but Believeland is alive and well.
It is 2:45 on the dot right here in San Diego, California. Not so sunny today, but we are still the sunny state. You're listening to Bix and K on USD Radio, UofSDmedia.com. my Facebook, your Facebook. Hey, you know, your beautiful family, they can't see me. You got to move that mic back
there
a
we
little.
go. Well, sorry, I didn't
There you
quite
go.
catch that.
There
We'll
you
mess with
go.
this a little bit.
That's right.
There you go. Now you guys can see Kay. Thank you, by the way, to everyone that is tuning in
Yes.
on Facebook Live. It's a really cool new thing we're trying out this year. Week 1, it went great. We loved all the feedback we got from you guys. And comment, ask us questions. Just let us know what you're thinking. We'll talk about it on the show, give you a little shout out. Makes the dynamic a little more fun, and we get to get in some of your guys' head a little bit. So
That's right.
yeah, give us your feedback.
Yeah, you know, I had a couple people come up to me and they were like, "Hey, I saw you on the Facebook machine." I was like, "That's pretty cool. I'm into it."
Has Facebook been around that long and it's starting to become obsolete?
That's right. Anyway, yeah, moving right on. The National Football League, they had a pretty interesting week this week, but I think none more interesting than the primetime game last night. Man, Seattle versus Arizona. If you haven't heard about it, just check any local sports station or ESPN.com. What a ride that was.
Yeah, you know, there's so much to talk about in a game that featured no touchdowns on either side of the ball.
That's right.
This is, I believe, the first time since overtime rules were created in the NFL that no team has scored a touchdown in a game that ended in a tie, which is unbelievable.
It is. And, you know, okay, so there's two sides of the ball that the media is kind of going on. One, they were saying it's one of the worst games ever played. Two, a lot of people were saying it was one of the best games ever played. What are your thoughts on that initial reaction on this Monday?
I got to go with the worst game ever played. I mean, yeah, I know it got exciting at the end and whatnot, but for 56 minutes of this game, nothing happened. I just kind of, I feel like I spaced out and, I don't know, zoned out and just missed everything, and I come back, there's 5 minutes left in the game, 4 minutes left in the game, and it's 3-0 Arizona. I mean, yeah, there were a couple block kicks here and there, and Seattle tied it up at the end, which made overtime intriguing to watch, but that was a pretty awful game of football.
It was pretty bad, but you know what? I'm not gonna go as far as to say it was one of the best games ever played, but it was definitely one of the more entertaining games ever played. And I know what you're saying. You know, there's no touchdowns in this day and age. How can it be entertaining?
It did feature a couple top defenses. In the league,
Exact.
which you know
you're
not expecting a high scoring game, but
yeah, and it's not going to be reflective of the ratings because of the fact that there was two West Coast teams. So a lot of the East Coast guys, they clocked out. They were done. They didn't want to watch this game, and I don't blame them. Obviously, the fan bases of Seattle and Arizona, respectively, probably watched that game to the end. I watched it because I was just waiting for something to happen. And I ended up, at the end of the game, just kind of screaming at my TV. It was
a little money on the line there.
It was a little, yeah. It was a little journey, you know what I mean? It was, it's going to, when we look back at the end of the season, as most of the major networks usually do, ESPN, Fox Sports, they usually do that best of or, highlights of the NFL season. This game is definitely going to come in mind, and I think there's always that one game in the regular season every year. Flashback to a few years ago when the replacement refs messed up that Packers Hail Mary. That was that game. This is this game.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Kay. Who is this tie worse for? The Seattle Seahawks, the Arizona Cardinals, or the NFL?
Ooh.
Their big primetime Sunday night game ending in a 6-6 tie.
Right.
Granted, it's between two good teams, but
it's got to be Arizona. It's got to be worse for Arizona. They were like what 2-1 on the total yardage, time of possession. They were 2-1. Like that's an like with those games. Chris Collinsworth said it best last night. Usually teams are up by 20, 28, 35 even.
And I believe Arizona actually clinched the time of possession win by the end of the third quarter.
That's right.
So 45 minutes into the game, they had more than 30 minutes of possession.
Right, and they were playing at home. You had an injured still Russell Wilson. You had a weak running game, a weak offensive line for Seattle.
And I think that was overlooked a little bit. The
Yeah.
fact that Russell Wilson couldn't move, essentially. I think he had something like 2 carries for -2 yards in the entire game. That's not characteristic of him. And it just leaves you wondering what would have happened if he was able to scramble a little bit. I know he wasn't completely incapacitated, but, that's kind of his deal.
That is. And, you're right. That's one of his attributes. And I think a bigger thing is that offensive line is looking a lot weaker. I mean, they have a couple rookies starting on that line. They've been playing okay for the Seattle Seahawks, but they've not been playing great.
And both O-lines kind of deteriorated when it came down to the end of the game. I mean, quarterbacks were getting hit left and right, be it Palmer or Wilson.
Right. And obviously, we can't even get into the special teams. That's kind of the whole factor of this game. I see your point as to why it would be bad on the NFL's part, because those ratings are going to go down, and everybody looks to the NBC product as the number one product in the NFL. I think you'd agree with that as well. But it's being talked about a lot. So, I don't know.
And
it's got to be Arizona though at the end.
Let's get to the end of this game a little bit with the kickers. Now, for those of you that didn't get a chance to watch the game, both teams got deep into overtime, and it looked like the Cardinals had wrapped up the win. Richard Sherman got beat. I forget which receiver beat him for Arizona, but Arizona essentially had the ball inside the 5-yard line. And David Johnson couldn't quite punch it in, but that leaves the Cardinals with a chip shot field goal. Catanzaro misses, bangs it off the post. And then the Seahawks go down the field. They look in control. Doug Baldwin makes a nice catch, beats the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu, gets Seattle down inside the 5, and their man, Steven Hauschka, misses his shot, pulls it left. So both coaches were obviously asked about their kicking games after the game, and the Cardinals, granted, have had more issues with Catanzaro than the Seahawks have had with Hauschka. But I wanted to get your take, Kay, on what both coaches said, because Pete Carroll, head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, took a stance saying, you know what, we love Hauschka, he's my guy, we're going to support him, all that kind of stuff. Now, this is the first big kick he's missed all year, okay, but on the other side of the ball, you got Bruce Arians for the Arizona Cardinals saying, you get paid to make it, in reference to Catanzaro.
Right.
So, whose side do you fall on, do you think?
Bruce Arians. It shows the polarizing, the dynamic of the two coaches, right? So you got Pete Carroll, definitely a West Coast guy, was in the Pac-12 for a long time, very easygoing, but very like a cheerleader type of situation. You got Bruce Arians, hard-nosed football, coming from the Steelers camp back in the day. I kind of lean with Bruce because, you know what, I think for a guy like Chandler Catanzaro, who's in a contract year, that's going to be big for him to sort of as a motivation factor. And there was another struggling big-time kicker in the league this week, Steven Gostkowski, and he said he was playing like crap, and that was his words. And Bill Belichick said, you know what, you just got to make those kicks, and I think he's gonna be fine. So you can take that example and really transfer it to how Bruce Arians plays his game with a guy like Catanzaro, and I think Catanzaro is going to make some clutch field goals going forward.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you on this one because I understand where both coaches are coming from, but even though at least most of the people back home know that I am not a big Pete Carroll fan necessarily, being a Niner fan, and especially having watched him since he was at USC, I've always been a big Stanford fan. My mom graduated from Stanford, so we've always supported them. So this kind of Harbaugh-Pete Carroll rivalry has been brewing for a while. All that to be said, I'm going to side with Carroll on this one. I think his approach is the way to go in this case, and I think Arians was especially hard for the Cardinals on Catanzaro, which isn't good for a young kid. You look at Carroll, who comes out and says, he's our guy, he's putting confidence in his kicker, he's going to get it turned around, he's a professional. I think Catanzaro will turn things around too, but especially for Chandler, who's such a young guy, you want to instill confidence in your kicker. I know he's cost you 1 or 2 games early on in the season. I think the Cardinals are still going to make the playoffs. They lost to teams or tied teams like the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots, teams that are NFL powerhouses. So I don't think it's anything to worry about right now. Yes, Catanzaro is going to have to sort things out, but I think Pete Carroll's got the right mentality in pumping his kicker up, giving him confidence, so the next time he goes out there, he's not thinking about what his coach said about him in the media the week before.
They also both lost to the Rams, so
that's an anomaly.
That's right. I don't know how that happens. Anyway, I see your point, and we'll see what happens going forward. But there were a ton of other games to talk about. Do you have one in mind that you'd like to get into?
Speaking of the Rams, they played over in London this week against the New York Giants. They lost that game after Case Keenum threw 4 picks, 3 of which came on the final 3 drives of the game. And first question has to be the one on everyone's mind.
That's right.
Rams going into a bye week. In 2 weeks, is Jared Goff their starter?
Well, he should be. He won't be because it's Jeff Fisher. And that says a lot about the Rams organization. The fact that Jared Goff is not going to start until probably like week 12, honestly, unless Case Keenum just totally bombs. And even then, I think Jeff Fisher still gives him like 3 weeks to work on it.
I think he sticks with him too.
That's a problem.
Goff should start, you're right, but I don't know that that's going to happen. They don't want to throw him in there right now. I think now would be the time.
It would be.
Case Keenum got his shot, but I don't know. I guess I'm not an NFL coach. That being said, Jeff Fisher is, I believe, 5 losses away from leading the NFL in all-time losses by a coach.
That's right. And, that is what is interesting is that this week they do have their bye week. So, I mean, Jeff Fisher's already come out and said that Case is our guy. Which he shouldn't have. That was a bad publicity move. It just lost a lot of people's interest in a big market like LA now. Mm-hmm. But, you have a week and a half, about 2 weeks to kind of figure out, going forward, how are we going to work with Case. But ultimately, this shouldn't even be a question. And we're going to see what happens. But according to the rumors out there, Jeff Fisher's already won a contract extension for next year, which is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I need his attorney. I need his agent.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how the Rams finish out this season because I do agree with you that contract seems intriguing, for lack of a better word. I know it's their first year in LA. There's going to be some growing pains. The Rams aren't the best team in the world right now. So I think next year will be more telling, and no matter what happens with his contract, I think after next year, it'll kind of be a make-or-break situation for Fisher. But right now, the Rams are headed in the wrong direction after starting off pretty strong, minus the loss to the 49ers in their season opener. So we'll just have to keep track on them, keep tabs on them throughout the season. But yeah, that four-pick performance from Keenum was not confidence instilling.
Yeah, you can say that again. Okay, now moving on to another quarterback situation in the NFC. The Cowboys, they're coming off a bye. They play the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday Night Football this week. Is it Dak or Tony? I mean, a lot of people have been asking that question, but let me hear the one answer.
I want Dak. Give me more Dak, honestly.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's just not the time for Tony Romo to come back. The Cowboys are rolling right now. You got a rookie that's stepped into things. It feels like he's grown up, 10 years in the 6 or 7 weeks he's been in the NFL. He's playing so well. Like I said, the Cowboys are on a roll. I don't see why you switch this up. Yes, Tony Romo is the veteran coming back. You're not going to trade him in the middle of the season right now. But why not let Dak keep rolling until he hits a roadblock? If he hits a roadblock, then you got the veteran Tony Romo to bring in. You have confidence in him. He's had a couple weeks back to kind of be around the players once again and get into a groove. And if Dak hits a wall, then yeah, throw Tony Romo in there and salvage your season. But with Dak rolling the way that he is, you got to stick with him.
I like that take. But knowing it's the Cowboys, it'll probably be Tony because of the whole legacy factor that we talked about last week on the show. Now, moving forward, it is 3 o'clock on the dot. I don't know how I keep doing that. I just keep looking at the clock, and it's right on there. Here on the West Coast, you're listening to Bix and K on USD Radio, uofsdmedia.com, and Facebook Live. This is going to be, for those of you who don't know, this is going to be our big NBA preview show a little later on into the broadcast, so I hope you guys stick with us, or if you're watching later, still stick with us, actually. But, and we'll get into some more NFL questions maybe during rapid fire, but I want to move into college football.
Big week in college football, especially with the number 2 team in the country, Ohio State, going down. That wasn't anything that we foresaw. And the team that slayed Goliath was none other than Penn State. And I would argue that this is the biggest win for that Penn State program in the post-Joe Paterno and Jerry Sandusky era.
Yeah, what a scene it was there over at Beaver Stadium in Pennsylvania. It was, I don't know if you got a chance to see some of those videos that were sort of rolling around the internet, but a program that deserved that win, and a program that is on the come up. I think it's actually the youngest program in the
I would certainly look out
football
for them next year and the year after that. Really, it's a young program. They're playing extremely well right now. They're obviously not going to wind up in the playoff picture this year or anything like that, but they have cracked the top 25 for the first time since 2011, I believe. And they're on the come up. I mean, this is a very good team. That game with Ohio State came down to the wire, but to win it in the way that they did by blocking a field goal and then having their defense hold up, that's great. That's all you can ask for as a coach. Just a gritty win from the Nittany Lions.
And speaking of coaches, their coach out there, Coach Franklin, what a coach he is. He came from Vanderbilt and deserved that job over at Penn State. He's going to really turn that program around. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. And to be honest with you, I think he's right up there with Urban Meyer. Actually, yeah, obviously, because they just beat him. And I wouldn't say he's Nick Saban-esque yet, but keep his name in your back pocket because he's going to be getting some better offers soon, or he'll take Penn State to the playoffs sometime.
Yeah.
That's a hot take.
Definitely remember that name. So now I want to get into what that Ohio State loss does to the top 25 rankings, because there were a couple top teams that lost this week, A&M going down to Alabama, so that shifted things up a little bit. What are your thoughts now on where the rankings are headed and looking forward to a potential playoff, what we might expect?
Yeah, I'm gonna put some glory on your name real quick, Bix, but you did text me on was it yesterday? Was it yesterday or Saturday?
Sunday morning, I think, after the game's concluded.
You texted me saying, "Hey, this is the rankings," and that's exactly what it was. I won't give it away yet, but yeah, of course, you got to stick with Alabama at number 1, which is what happened. They just look so good, man. I mean, are they going to win the playoff already? We'll see. The
answer to that question is yes, by the way, but we'll get into the details of that in a minute.
And number 2, Michigan. Michigan is looking really good over there.
Another solid win, and Ohio State losing helped them out.
And they haven't been bitten by the injury bug either. I think that's really important to note. Looking at those top 2 teams, I mean, you got to think that's going to be what the playoff is going to be. What about you? Give me your analysis for 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, it's interesting now with that Ohio State loss. I did text you on Sunday morning predicting what would happen, and to my surprise, I actually got it right because I wasn't sure that it was going to shake out this way. So Alabama on top, Michigan at 2, Clemson moves up to 3, University of Washington comes in at number 4, that last playoff spot right now. 5 is Louisville moving up, and 6 is the spot which Ohio State dropped to, moving down 4 spots total. So this is a really intriguing top 6 to me right now. I think it could easily stay this way, especially if Clemson passes that Florida State hurdle looming this weekend. And in that situation, you would have Alabama playing the University of Washington in a semifinal playoff, as well as Clemson playing Michigan with Michigan as the home team. And that doesn't change my predictions, like you said, for the actual college football title game. I've got Michigan, Alabama, with Michigan winning. I know we have the same title game. You have it going the other way in the end. But I just don't see two teams that are good enough to challenge Bama and Michigan right now. Ohio State could make a run at things and kind of ruin Michigan's parade at the end of the season, but I've got them winning that game.
I think Ohio State's playoff hopes are over. Another interesting take. I mean, you're right. Washington. There's no way Washington loses again, right? Because in that sort of weak Pac-12, they have a pretty good schedule going forward. You think they've locked it in there?
I think they have to, from my standpoint.
Right.
Even if Ohio State were to beat Michigan, if you've already pushed Ohio State behind Washington for losing that one game, there is no win in college football that vaults them back in front of the Huskies, barring a Husky loss.
Okay.
In my opinion, I don't know that the committee would agree with me if it would come to that,
that's the big issue.
and that's the big issue. But in my opinion, you can't take Ohio State from 2-6 and then move them back up with one loss still. If Washington stays undefeated,
I think not Ohio State, but I think Louisville is going to be a team that could maybe make that last minute push. Granted, they have that one loss against Clemson, but I think they could sneak their way in there.
If Clemson loses to Florida State this weekend, I think they fall out of the top 4 and Louisville takes their spot.
But okay, so how about, is this a viable possibility? Alabama, Michigan, Clemson, Louisville, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
No, that's not going to happen. You're not going to have Clemson and Louisville in there necessarily. I think Ohio State, if they beat Michigan, would be that 4th team if the Huskies were to lose.
And now another interesting look at the top 10. Number 7, Nebraska, coming in at 7-0. What are your thoughts on that team, and do you think that they could make a push, considering they're undefeated?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the top 10 now, and we talk a lot about the top 5, but when you look at 6 through 10, you have a couple teams that haven't necessarily been talked about as much throughout the year. You got, barring Ohio State, you have Nebraska, Baylor, Texas A&M, and West Virginia, who's undefeated, and we have not heard anything about them up until now. That could be a potential interesting team to watch down the stretch. Realistically, I don't think any of these teams have a shot at making the playoff unless there's complete pandemonium and you have multiple losses from the teams that are up at the top right now. But they will certainly make for good bowl games come December and January. So a couple teams to look out for. And on this topic a little bit, Kay, I wanted to ask you, put you on the hot seat right here. What are the most important positions in college football on the field?
On the field. Oh, because I was going to say head coach, but that would have been cheating. On the field, the obvious one is quarterback, but in this ever-changing sort of progressive system that we have in college football, the quarterback is more like a running back. That's why I think either one of the guard positions on the offensive line really make or break a team's college football hopes. Because, well, one, on the defensive side of things, these guys, they're our age. They're so aggressive, and they just want it. The only way you can get hurt by the NFL and Mel Kiper's big board on the defensive side of things is if you make big plays. So the only guys barring that are the guys in the offensive line. And that's why Alabama is so strong. Obviously, they get the biggest and best guys. You look at Cam Robinson, for example, who's going to go top 10 in this year's draft. He's a difference maker no matter what quarterback you put back there, whether it was A.J. McCarron or the last few string of quarterbacks that have gotten them far enough. That's the guy that's really protecting them and making them, propel.
Yeah, I was hoping to catch you off guard a little bit here with that question because I'm going to agree with you. I think you can stick anyone behind center. They can throw a halfway decent spiral and be somewhat accurate. But you need an offensive line, and you need good defensive backs in college in order to succeed. I think to me, that's the recipe at having a winning team. Because like you said, you could throw whatever running back, whatever quarterback, Pretty much. I mean, you still have to have talented guys back there.
Right.
But you can throw a lot of guys back there and have your team still be successful if your offensive line can hold up and allow you to move the ball. On the other side of the ball, if you have a strong core of defensive backs, you can throw those guys back there in coverage, and they can sit back there all day. Even if their defensive line can't necessarily get back to the quarterback, they're playmakers, and they're going to make something happen. And that's why you look at a team like Alabama or like Michigan. That's why they're so talented right now, is because they can stop the ball on defense, and their offensive line just rules the game.
Exactly. And even with a team like a lot of the teams in the SEC kind of prove that point, and that's why they're sort of the best conference over the last decade. But even a team like Michigan, who just gets those big Midwestern guys, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and if you look at the top 10, the AP top 10 right now, I bet you could name me 3 to 4 starting quarterbacks on those teams.
That's an interesting, Lamar Jackson.
And that's about it. You got Lamar Jackson, you got Deshaun Watson, and
that's the part.
I mean, those are the two headliners.
Yeah.
I know I could probably name 1 or 2 more, but that's just me being the college football fan that I am. But for most people, Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson, those are the guys.
Those are the guys.
You're not going to be able to name any other quarterbacks in that top 10, really.
And you know what's so interesting, when you look at NFL draft caliber quarterbacks, sort of pro-ready quarterbacks, for example, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, those types of, quarterbacks, they're not in the top 10 usually.
Yeah.
Okay. Now Deshaun Watson's going to be an interesting character going forward into this draft, but that's what kind of separates them. Sometimes they get sacked because of that weaker offensive line, but they can still make plays, and that's what separates them.
Yeah, it's also interesting because by no means are these top 10 quarterbacks bad players. They got their teams into the top 10, but a lot of times in college, they're still using that time to develop, and when good teams have such talented offensive lines and they give these quarterbacks time in the pocket, they can kind of sort things out for themselves, and that's how they become better quarterbacks. Because they'll start, when they're younger, but by the time they're seniors, they've had enough time in the lineup, and they've been given a lot of time in the pocket to kind of learn. And that's when they make that final step, that final leap into being an NFL-ready, pro-ready quarterback.
That's right. I like that take. We're going to be moving forward here in a second. I have one last question for college football. Leonard Fournette. We've talked about him a lot less this year, but this week he kind of reminded us just how powerful and good he is with that huge hit. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend you go check that out. He absolutely bulldozered a guy. Where do you think his draft stock is? Because considering he looks like a guy that's saving himself for the NFL, so to speak.
His draft stock, I think, is unchanged. He was extremely talented before he got hurt. He is still extremely talented, and like you said, watching that hit the other night, it's evident how powerful of a back he is. At this point, LSU doesn't really have a ton to play for in the rest of their season, with a couple losses on their schedule. So Fournette's just going to be saving himself, in my opinion, for that NFL draft. He wants to look good for scouts because that's really where he's going to make his money. I think he's a first-round back this year. I think someone could potentially take him even in the top 15. And as long as he stays healthy, you're looking at a great running back, one of the best prospects that has come out of the draft in a couple years, I think.
That's right. It is 3:14. You're listening to USD Radio, Bix and K on USD Radio, either on Facebook or U of SD Media. Thanks for checking us out. Now we're going to be moving into the NBA. I've been so excited to get into this. The NBA season kicks off tomorrow night with the New York Knicks traveling to Cleveland, another Cleveland team that's so good. And then later on, the Golden State Warriors take on the San Antonio Spurs at home. Two great matchups, a lot of star power. Of course, Tim Duncan's not going to be there, but
neither will Greg Popovich. Another important factor.
Greg Popovich.
Did I mess up a name?
That's right.
All right, never mind. Keep going.
Anyway, Pop's going to be there. Don't worry about that, guys. Now, looking at the regular season this year, are you excited? What are your initial thoughts coming off that really historic Cleveland win and a really more historic, honestly, Golden State regular season?
Yeah, it's again going to be an NBA season, in my opinion, that's a tale of two horses, essentially. You got Cleveland in the East and the Warriors in the West. I don't know that there's going to be anyone that's going to challenge both of those teams where they're at right now. They're both very deep. There's an argument to be made that the Cavaliers are actually the deeper team this year and will be, excited to get out there and defend their title and show the world that, it's not all about the Warriors.
But, is it all about the Warriors? I know you just said that, but the rest of the world seems to think that. My biggest question looking at your team, the Golden State Warriors, was that chemistry going to be there early on? Are they going to lose a lot of games going, in the first part of the season, and then they'll end up winning the rest going forward? But looking at the recent game they played in San Diego against LA, and some of the other games they've been playing in the preseason, it certainly doesn't look that way. They look fine. Actually, they look like they have more chemistry than before.
Yeah, they look good to go. I mean, for all my Warriors fans back home, always repping the Bay. But it's going to be interesting to see how they come out. I don't think their chemistry is going to be affected all that much. Kevin Durant seems to be meshing with the team really well. There have been a couple reports in the media, that things maybe aren't going so well right now. A couple people talking about Draymond maybe disrupting things, but everyone's come out to the defense of the team. Steph especially saying, it's all fine. Don't worry about it. I believe him. I think the Warriors are set to have another great season, and we could potentially see a finals rematch once again, which would be really interesting.
Yeah, it'd be the third time in a row. And I don't see it going any other way. It's got to be the Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. That's my one criticism, I guess, of the NBA. But I also really love the storyline it creates. 3 years in a row, sort of this battle. The Cavaliers have won, the Warriors have won. Who's going to win this last one? Arguably, the last game in LeBron's second prime. He keeps himself so healthy that he has two primes, in my opinion. An interesting thing that I saw was that the Cavaliers starting lineup, so the top five guys on that lineup, will make $100 million, and that is more than 18 other teams combined. Do you think money is the key to winning in the NBA, or do you think it's more about homegrown talent? Let's leave that question open because I'm interested to hear your take.
Yeah, I don't think money necessarily correlates. I mean, in this case, yeah, for the Cavaliers, that's a huge asset for them. They were able to pay a lot of money for their talented players. But going back again to the Warriors as an example, the last couple of years they haven't been paying Steph that much. I mean, at least not what he should be getting paid. So when you look at it overall, as long as you have a couple guys in there that are willing to take some pay cuts and take one for the team, it's not going to matter as much. When you're spending the amount of money the Cavs are, that's going to bring with it some results, you would think. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But in the end, I really don't think that money is all that big of a teller as to how the team is going to play.
I think Mike Conley would disagree with you there. He's making $35 million this year.
Yeah, he better perform.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that maybe a little later. I want to look at some of the other teams in the East. So you have the Toronto Raptors, who lost a couple of key parts in for example, Bismack Biyombo. But they seem to have a strong team going there. Do you think that they're the second in the East, or do you have anybody else over there?
They could be. I certainly think that they will be a top team in the East. I don't know that they will grab that second spot. I look more at a team like the Celtics, who we talked about a lot at the end of last season. Very young team. They're looking really strong right now. And I think they could potentially make a run. I know Jared Sullinger got hurt the other day, that's a little bit of a knock for them. But I still think that they're an extremely talented team and could be up there in that top 2 in the East.
Yeah, and on top of Jared Sullinger, Marcus Smart's been dealing with some ankle injuries. Kelly Olynyk, he's still recovering sort of from that shoulder surgery. But I think Brad Stevens as a coach is going to be able to overcome those odds. In my opinion, he's the next Greg Popovich, which, yeah, he's still here.
My bad.
That's fine. It's fine. And another team I really like in the East is the Indiana Pacers. I think they could make a serious run. They might be sort of the Atlanta Hawks of this year. They have Paul George.
Yeah, they're getting healthier again. I don't
That's
know that I'm gonna put them in my top 3 or anything like that, but they certainly will be a playoff team, I believe, and make things interesting. Like I said, in the end, I don't think they're going to wind up doing much once they get to the playoffs, but they'll definitely be in the mix there somewhere. Now, what about the West? Looking over to the West, beyond the Warriors, beyond the Tim Duncan-less Spurs, who do you see kind of making a run at the playoffs this year, making a deeper run maybe?
On the West side of things?
On the West side of things.
You kind of, I want to make the case that the Thunder are going to. That newfound look, obviously Kevin Durant has made a lot of bad, I don't even want to get into that really. Bad juju is a better, safer for work word to use. But what I like is that it kind of ignited this flame in Russell Westbrook alongside, the sort of the flame that's still been burning with, Billy Donovan as their coach, Steven Adams and Aaron Cantor. They had that 3-1 lead going against the Warriors. I mean, you can't overlook that. Obviously, Kevin Durant was a big factor, but I always argued that Russell Westbrook just needed a team to be his own, and he's gotten that. The entire state of Oklahoma is kind of looking his way to deliver. I don't see that they win a lot of games early on as they figure stuff out, but you got to look at the Thunder to make a huge impact without Kevin Durant.
And moving on a little bit, what about the Blazers? The team that's been in the mix the last couple of years. You got Damian Lillard, who's coming into his own, who came out the other day and said, I want the MVP. I want to be that guy, while at the same time advancing his fire rap career. What do you think about that? Where do you see the Blazers fitting into the mix this year?
Dropping dimes. He's going to be dropping dimes.
Dame dropping dimes.
The Trailblazers look really strong. They've lost a couple of key players in the last few years, but I think that a lot like Russell Westbrook has allowed Dame Lillard to kind of make that team his own. At the same time, he's still a really true point guard in terms of scoring and passing. That's a big deal, and I think he will make a serious run for the MVP, although I'm going to give my MVP to Russell Westbrook this year, actually.
Really?
That's right.
And MVP, do you see him making it to the finals?
I don't see them going to the finals, but I see them in that Western Conference Series finals against your Golden State Warriors. But going back to the Trailblazers, they're going to be a competitor in that playoffs as well. I hope that they sort of differentiate themselves from what they've been the last few years, where they lose in the first round, barely make it into the playoffs. I hope they win key matchups going forward, because the City of Roses deserves an outstanding team again. An interesting team that a lot of people might not know is good are the Utah Jazz. They've kind of been under the radar. A big thing about the Utah Jazz, as you might know, is that not a lot of big free agents want to move to Salt Lake City. But they've just kind of been building up with smaller players, younger players in the draft, and they're looking to be a real competitor going forward.
Yeah, they're going to contend. They're not going to do much in the end. They were very close to the playoffs last year. I think they probably make it this year. Like you said, they've got a solid core of young players. No one really flashy, like a LeBron or something like that. But they will be a good team, and they'll be in that playoff mix. Much like a Pacers team, I think, in the East. granted, the Pacers do have a couple of those stars on their roster. I think they will have fairly similar seasons.
Same color palette as well.
Same color palette.
Yeah, and another team close to my heart in the West is the Memphis Grizzlies. Now they haven't struggled per se, but they've gone through a lot of changes. They kind of die out early in the playoffs if they make it that far. But I see a guy like Mike Conley and his big contract being a big factor for these Grizzlies. Do you think that they could be a competitor against a team like the Golden State Warriors? Obviously, they're the caliber to be matched up to. Do you think that they could beat them straight up?
I don't think they're going to beat them in a series.
No,
I think if you give them a game in the middle of the season, it's basketball, anything can happen. They're certainly a very talented group of individuals, and they could beat the Warriors. You look at a couple of the losses the Warriors had last year, they were not even to some of the top teams. They were to some weaker teams down below. But, yeah, they could take a game off them during the regular season. They're not going to beat them in a playoff series. I don't think anyone will. But, yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Now, another team that we talked about in pre-show a little bit that you find interesting, Kay, is the Minnesota Timberwolves. What do you think about how they're stacking up this season?
So interesting. Honestly, this is my team to watch this year. Austin, if you're listening, you know exactly why. We have our weekly 2K matchups, and we love playing with the Timberwolves. And there's 3 reasons why. One, Minneapolis, Minnesota, is a rising city. They're getting more and more, they have the potential to get more and more free agents. They have the potential to grow as a city alongside the thriving economy. And that is a big factor when you look at the success of a franchise. 2, I think the biggest point, they have Tom Thibodeau now. Tom Thibodeau is a proven coach, and to take what he's already built and use that as a template for further teams is really important for an NBA franchise. Different from college basketball or a different sport like football. Different type of coaching, and he has what it takes to get them far. 3, and also very, very importantly, they have the best young roster ever. I'm just going to start naming some players. Andrew Wiggins, Shabazz Muhammad, Karl Anthony Towns, Zach LaVine. They have Jordan Hill now. So many good players to make a deep run. Now, last year they were 29-53. Honestly, I'm not saying they flipped the record, but I think they get 40 wins this year and keep growing from there.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think they go 500. Which is pretty good, man.
Which would be good for them after the last couple of seasons that they've had. I think you're right. They could make a pretty good push this year. I don't see them in the playoffs, but I think they make pretty big strides moving forward. And you look forward a little bit to next year, and maybe then they're a team that looks to make that playoff push late in the season.
Yeah, and with Tom Thibodeau, with his proven track record at the Chicago Bulls, he knew how to get himself into the position of, whether it's the last seed or the first seed, into that playoffs and work from there. I think that's what's really important in the NBA. As long as you get your foot in the door, you could go a lot further, and that's true of the NFL as well. That's why I like these 2 sports so much. They create the narratives that we want to watch. I've said this a lot about the NBA. The NBA is a players-driven league. That's why there's more stars in the NBA. They're more vulnerable. They're not hidden under pads or playing, not playing every game. They usually play a lot of games. You're right there on the court, and you see their bare faces, and I think that's important. Now, do you see that the NBA goes further into the superstar factor, or do you see them coming back and being more of a team-driven, coach-driven league?
Moving forward, you would have to hope that they move back a little bit, in my opinion, just because it seems like they can't go any further than they're at right now. When you look at how polarizing the NBA is, with the Cavs in the East, the Warriors in the West, guys like LeBron, Steph Curry. I mean, there are a couple household names in the NBA. There's probably, I could count on one hand how many names that everyone in the country right now could recognize.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge. I don't know that the NBA has ever had it to this extent with so much media saturation and so much exposure to all these guys. right now. And so I think probably the only way to go is back. I think they'll probably hit a ceiling at some point. You can't be paying 5 guys on your roster millions and millions of dollars to have 5 superstars. So I think it's going to catch up to them eventually. I don't know that it happens extremely soon, but in the future, I think they might shrink back a little bit.
Well, with the salary cap going higher and higher each year, it is going to be interesting how they handle that. Can they get more role players and more depth on the bench, or just pay a guy like Kevin Durant just a buttload of money? But what is interesting is I kind of run this by the mom test or the little sister test. So if my mom knows a player in the NBA or in the NFL or wherever, or if my little sister knows a player in the NBA or the NFL, that's a superstar. So my mom and my little sister would know LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, or they would know Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. So there's more people
in the NFL.
In the NFL, right? God, I don't want to see them playing basketball.
That'd be ugly.
Yeah. So there's more people that my mom and my little sister would know in the NBA than they would be in the NFL. And that's why I think it's more of a superstar-driven league, and it's going to just keep going forward like that.
And you're right. I mean, there's aspect of the league that their faces aren't covered. It adds a whole lot to it. I don't think a lot of people realize that, but when you're looking at NFL players down on the field, for example, they're covered in masks most of the games, so they're not necessarily the most recognizable players, whereas a sport like basketball, like baseball, there's nothing covering these guys' faces, so you know who they are if you watch enough of the games.
Yeah, and if you've ever been to an NBA game, you're right there on the court. You can see every pimple.
Oh, you're right up close.
Yeah, so that's another differentiator from the MLB or the NFL is that you get to see them up close, personal. Even on TV, it's closer camera angles and replays, and that's why I think it's just become that ego-driven, superstar-driven league.
And speaking of, I wanted to ask you something. I saw Nick Wright talking about this week on Fox Sports 1.
That's my man.
He was talking about this point that maybe the Warriors losing the NBA Finals was actually good for the future of the NBA. I mean, I know my Warriors fans back home won't like to hear that. I don't like to hear it either. But when you think about what they did in the offseason, the Warriors got rid of a lot of role players that were a big part of who they were in order to go get a guy like Kevin Durant. And essentially, a team that was already so good and had won a title and gotten back to another NBA Finals was dismantled in order to create another superstar team. So what are your first reactions to that? Do you agree with it? Do you think it's good for the NBA? What do you think?
For those of you, that don't know Nick Wright, you can catch him on The Herd occasionally on Fox Sports 1. And a really quick funny story, for my 21st birthday, I ran into him on the poker tables at the Venetian, and so I kind of had this cool bond with him. And I also think he's one of the best sportscasters, so check him out. A little plug in there. But two, going back to your question and sort of his point, I think that is an incredible look at it, because people just look at Kevin Durant, right? They just look at that was the biggest offseason acquisition, which it was. But what did they give up to get him? Andrew Bogut. They gave up Sean Livingston. Sort of these
Festus Ezeli.
Festus Ezeli.
Welcome back when the Warriors played Portland the other night. That was pretty cool.
Oh, nice.
It's guys like this, like the heart and soul of their team the last couple of years that they gave up to go make this move.
That's right, and I'm surprised they didn't even give up a guy. They didn't give up a guy like Andrew Iguodala or Andre. It's a long week. It's already been a long week.
Yeah.
Andre Iguodala, and so that furthers the point of what Steve Kerr is trying to do there in Oakland. With the problem is though, if Kevin Durant goes down, if Steph Curry goes down, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, they go down, there's no next man up mentality, and that is a problem for the NBA. But if they don't go down, which hopefully they won't for the sake of the league, they've been doing the right things. I mean, I think that's just how you win in the NBA now.
Yeah, certainly this aspect of star power has taken over, and we're just going to have to see how the Warriors fare this season. That being said, I think we're kind of wrapping up with the NBA here. We want to check in with you guys one more time. Sorry we keep kind of pausing every once in a while here. We're just trying to incorporate all our social media into the show. Thank you guys so much for listening, those of you who are checking us out through Facebook Live on my account or on Kay's over on the other side of the room. And, of course, everyone that's listening on uofsdmedia.com. For those of you that are on Facebook, check us out. I want to shout out my boy Ricky Fischel. Thanks for the love, Ricky. Appreciate it. But everyone, just come ask questions if you got them. Questions, comments, anything you want us to talk about, throw them up in the comments section on Facebook, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. It's a lot of fun to interact with you guys. This is an aspect that we haven't really had before, and since we won't have the opportunity to have a phone for the foreseeable future, this is a great way to get things rolling with you guys. So comment away, ask questions, do all that good stuff, and let's keep rolling here, Kay.
Let's do it. Now, I want to talk about soccer real quick. It is 3:35, so we have about 15 minutes left in the show. And so I really want to...
25 minutes left in the show.
25 minutes?
Not 15.
3:50, Brad.
Oh, we're going to 350 today.
That's right.
All right, we're going 350.
Yeah. Hey, we're getting used to this. We're building it up.
Yeah, new time this year for us.
That's right. Now, the big thing I want to talk about before going into the Champions League was Chelsea versus Manchester United. That was the big game of the week in the Premier League. It was on Sunday, yesterday, and Chelsea sort of thrashed Man United in a way, 4-0. How does that reflect on Mourinho and Manchester United as a whole? Do you think that's more Chelsea's good sport, or Mourinho's bad play?
I'm gonna blame this one on Mourinho. I loved the big win this week. I really like Antonio Conte. I think he's a great coach. He's doing wonders over there at Chelsea, and I don't know. I like the fact that he was pumping up the crowd when it was 4-0. I know Mourinho criticized him for that at the end of the game and said, you do that when it's 1-0, not 4-0. But the Man U fans were being louder than the Chelsea supporters at the end of the game, and you can't blame him for wanting to get his core of fans into things. I mean, what more can you ask from your team? Chelsea put on an astonishing display, and nothing that I don't think was expected at all, and it was just great to see Mourinho beaten in that fashion.
Yeah, I honestly had thought, when I went to sleep on Saturday night, that I'd wake up and see that Manchester United would win. And here's my big reason why. One, Manchester United is not in the Champions League, so they have a lot of resources to focus on just the Premier League. And they're sort of built for now. Ibrahimovic is not getting any younger. Other guys, Rooney is not getting any younger. Paul Pogba they signed so that they could win the Premier League now. If they can't get it done against Chelsea, regardless of if it's at Stamford Bridge or Old Trafford, that shows a lot of holes in their system. And I do agree with you. I think Mourinho is to blame here. I think his attitude, his egoism, I never liked him. I know that was a bit blunt, but it's been proven in the last 3 years that he cannot adapt. He was great at the old days in Chelsea. He was great in Inter Milan. But he's not a guy like Pep Guardiola who can change the way he plays his game to the system that's running today.
Yeah, absolutely. Wanted to give a quick shout out to Hunter Jameson, who's watching on my Facebook Live feed. We will get to your question in just a minute when we hit rapid fire. Give us about 5-10 minutes, wrap up our little discussion right here. That being said, it was kind of a tough weekend in general for some of the bigger teams in the Premier League, besides Chelsea and Liverpool, who both got good wins. But you look at Man City, who drew against Southampton, Arsenal, who drew, and Tottenham, who drew.
Yeah.
What are we to make of that? Because right now you got about 5 teams at the top of the Premier League that are within a point of each other. I believe Liverpool, Arsenal, and Man City all sit at 20. And we got a couple teams sitting at 19 as well.
I love it. You know why? Because polarity is what makes the Premier League the most exciting league to watch. When you look at La Liga, Bundesliga, it's the same 2-3 teams at the top, arguably even just one team. You can just put all your money on Bayern to win the league. all your money on Barca or Madrid to win the league. In the Premier League, that just doesn't happen, and it's been seen here. We're about 10, 11 weeks into the season, and still it's anybody's race. I would have picked Man City to win it. You would have probably picked Arsenal to win it.
Going with my Gunners.
Liverpool's right there in the picture. Chelsea's in the picture. I really like that. Yeah, I don't know what happened this week that so many teams drew against weaker teams. But I think going forward, it allows more resources to be held for the bigger games. So they can draw against Southampton because they know Southampton's not going to win the league per se.
I don't know. That's a game they still got to win though. If you
right.
have title aspirations, you got to pick up points wherever you can, and you're especially going to have to pick up points against stronger teams. That's where it becomes most important. Is when you get a Chelsea, when you get a Man U, any leg up you can get on some of these bigger teams is going to help you in the end when it comes down to the end of the season.
That's right. Now, looking at switching from the Premier League to the Champions League, we had a couple interesting matchups this week. Manchester City and Barcelona. What were your initial thoughts of that game played at the new camp in Barca?
Messi's just going to be Messi, right?
That's right.
Going off. He got his hat trick. I mean, Barcelona wins 4-0. Could have been more. Could have been 5 if Neymar puts away a PK there towards the end of the game before he scored the eventual 4th goal. But I just don't know that there's anyone that can stop them right now. I know we talk about this every year, especially in the group stage, and it seems like they've played Man City quite a few times recently as well. But it's hard to envision someone stopping them unless you get to the later stages of the competition. You look at a Real Madrid or a Bayern Munich quality team, but really it's going to depend on the form of all these teams when you get down to the end of the competition. Who's healthy, how they're playing, all that has to be taken into consideration because they're all juggernauts essentially, and it's going to be a heavyweight clash no matter what. You just have to take what you have into battle and hope you come out on the other side.
You make a good point, and the only thing that concerns me with Barca, if you don't know out there, that's my team. Arsenal is of course Bix's team, but with Barca, it's just about keeping healthy. So we saw Andres Iniesta go down. It's not like they're getting any younger. So that and Piqué is as well kind of deteriorating on the defensive side of things. I hope that doesn't play a factor going forward, but that has been Barca's one flaw, is that, relatively speaking, they haven't gotten younger every season, where a team like Man City or Bayern really buy up a lot of key players on the bench, La Masia Training Academy, for them to get into their prime, to replace a guy like Iniesta or a guy like Piqué. Whereas you look at Bayern, they'll just buy their players from Borussia who are in their prime, and they can win them key matchups in the group stages to get them into the knockout stages when the guys return healthy. I know that was a lot of information, but that makes a big point in a competition like the Champions League.
Oh, it really does. And if Barcelona is going to hold up, they're gonna need to stay healthy and have those key players like Messi that are going to drive them to win. Now, unfortunately, we're going to cut our discussion of soccer a little bit short here this week. We'll get back into it next week and get you guys caught up on what's happening in the Champions League, Premier League, all that good stuff as usual. But now, with about 6-7 minutes left in our show, we want to go to rapid fire. We got a couple questions on Facebook right here that I want to get to. So first off, I want to start by asking you, Kay. Hunter Jameson had this question a few minutes ago. Do you think the Indians are in the position that they're in without acquiring Andrew Miller?
I think he's a big part of why they're there, but another big part of it is their health. They haven't lost a lot of guys going forward, and they've been really healthy in the playoffs. I think that's big. I think they've kept their pitchers sort of loose. I think they've done the right things at the right time. Andrew Miller was a big factor. Don't get me wrong, but
they definitely used him at the right time.
That's right. If you're playing 156 games, 162 games, an astronomical amount of games in the regular season. If you're not healthy in the playoffs, it doesn't matter if you're Chris Bryant or Derek Jeter in his prime. You got to be healthy, and I think that's a big factor. Now I got a question from you from my friend AT over here. Switching to the NHL, we're early into the season, but my Nashville Predators, I don't know how well versed you are in the NHL right now, but my Nashville Predators are looking really good. They're looking like almost the favorite to win the Stanley Cup. Who do you like besides them, or do you like them?
They're going to be a great team to watch. Like you said, they made the playoffs last year. I believe they lost to my Sharks. I could be wrong. Someone will have to fact check me on that one.
That's right.
But they are an up-and-coming team, and I'm excited to see what they can do this year. They're extremely talented. I think they make a run in the playoffs. I think they maybe even get a little bit further than they did last year. So look out for the Nashville Predators.
Yeah.
Next question I got from you comes from Nick Del Mundo, who commented on my Facebook post. He wants to know if you think Big Ben's injury will affect how the Steelers do down the stretch. We talked a little bit about this last week, but now after seeing how the Steelers performed with Landry Jones at quarterback against a good Patriots team, I mean, they hung in there. What do you think this does to their odds of making the playoffs and making a run in the playoffs?
It 100% affects them. Any quarterback, any primetime quarterback that goes down is going to affect their team's chances to go deep in the playoffs. Landry Jones isn't Big Ben, and another thing that we have to keep in mind is that Mike Tomlin has to stop getting these passes. He's got to get some stuff done. This was a prime season for him to do that. Sure, the defense isn't as strong, but you have Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. You had Big Ben. So it's all about the adversity he faces now is if he can get these games done with Landry Jones. But there's no doubt that if Roethlisberger goes down at any point, it affects every matchup until he comes back. Now I have a question for you. I had a question from Ross P. Looking into the SEC, it sort of seems like a lock for Alabama. But on the other side of things, he says that LSU has the talent going forward to get to the SEC championship and maybe make a run at Alabama in that championship game. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they certainly have a case for making a run and getting to a championship game. That being said, I don't see anyone taking down Alabama. I think they're just too strong right now. Fournette would make things interesting again. I mean, he's a wild card. He can always have a historic game, if you will. But like we were talking about earlier, the way Alabama's offensive line is set up and how good their defense has played this year, I think they have 8 or 9 defensive touchdowns this year. I realistically can't see anyone beating them. Yeah, it is college football. Anything can happen, but Bama is my pick to get to the title game. I think they eventually fall. I think Michigan finds a way behind Harbaugh to exploit the few weaknesses that Bama has, but until then, I don't see anyone beating them.
Yeah, and I have to correct myself. LSU is in the SEC West as well, so it wouldn't be LSU Alabama, although that would be a very fun game to watch in Atlanta, Georgia. And of course, with Les Miles going down, losing his position so early on, I think that just creates so much instability that I can't see them winning, big key matchups.
Absolutely. Now we got time for about one more question. So what I wanted to ask you, Kay, is going back to the NHL for a little bit. The Edmonton Oilers recently made Connor McDavid their new captain. Now, for those of you who may not be as familiar with the NHL, Mr. McDavid is 19 years old. That's my age. Now, to be a captain in a professional sports league at the age of 19, that's unheard of. What are your thoughts on how that pans out? Is that a good move for the Oilers? This is the youngest captain I believe that they've ever had. Do you think a kid that young can come in and be a leader of men on a team with guys that are all going to be older than him?
Well, I think that just shows the potential for longevity. So when you look at a sport like hockey, these guys, I mean, they don't last as long as baseball guys, but they definitely last long if they're in the right position, the right organization. You look at a guy like Patty Kane, Sidney Crosby. They've been there quite a while. So if you make a guy captain at 19, he has that chip on his shoulder to perform. Okay, He might seem privileged at times because he's like, okay, I'm the captain, but he also has the responsibility. So it might not pay off this season or next, but going forward, he's going to have that leadership mentality to lead the Oilers to a place that they haven't been in some time.
Yeah, sounds good. And with that is going to wrap up our show for today. Thank you so much to everyone that listened in. We will be back with you next Monday. We're trying to nail down our times right now. Unfortunately, we both have class on either end of our show, so we should be on the air around 2:30. If we're not quite on at 2:30, give us 5 minutes, and we should be good to go. Same thing on the other end. We'll probably be ending this year around 3:50. We might go a couple minutes over if we have time on certain days. But yeah, we'd love to see you back on Mondays. Thank you so much to everyone that commented on both my feed and Kay's feed up there. Thank you to everyone that listened on U of SD Radio. And we look forward to seeing you back listening to Bix and K next week, Monday, 2:30 to 3:50. Thank you so much.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, Facebook Live. See you guys next week.
All right, guys. Take care.